Sergeant Elias Reed did not flinch when Major Owen Vale ordered the medals ripped from his hospital wall. He sat in his wheelchair beneath the white lights of Ward C, half his face scarred, one hand trembling over the blanket, where a war dog named Ranger had planted both paws like a god at a grave. Nurses watched in silence as ribbons, badges, and a cracked dog tag were dropped into a gray evidence box. They called Elias gone. They called his honor stolen. Tendaku snapped his head toward the box and let out a low, wounded sound. No. In the room understood. Major Vale reached for the last medal. Elias's lips moved for the first time in 6 months. Nurse Maravos bent close and heard him whisper one name. Sparrow, and Major Vale went pale. Before this story unfold, tell us where you are watching from tonight. Leave your country name in the comments so this quiet ward feels a little less alone. And if you believe in courage, loyal dogs, hidden heroes, and emotional justice, subscribe to the Quiet Medic. Ward C, ISORT, Mercy Military Hospital had rules for everything. Rules for when lights dimmed. Rules for when family visits ended. Rules for how many photographs a patient control complained. Rules for silence after these hours. Though silence never truly came to a ward full of broken soldiers. Machines high, prosthetic limbs clicked against tile. Old nightmares surfaced in coughs, groans, and sudden cries from men who were convinced the war had followed them home. But there was no rule for what happened that Tuesday morning. There was no rule for stripping a wounded soldier's room while he washed. Nurse Maravos stood at the medication cart with a syringe of saline of one hand when Major Owen Vale entered Ward C with 2 military police officers and an every ribbon sastre, every polished button caught the fluorescent light. His jaw was clean. His boots were black mirrors, and his eyes had the flat certainty of a man who had never once wondered whether power might make him cruel. Behind him came Colonel Helena Price, the hospital commander. She was older, sharper, slower to speak. Her expression was tight, as though she had already argued against this and lost somewhere behind closed doors. Mara saw the paperwork in Vale's hand before. She saw where he was headed. Room C, Elias Reed's room. Elias sat by the window in his wheelchair, wrapped in an army green blanket. Though the word was war, 32 years old, but from a distance he looked Anson. Burns climbed the left side of his neck and disappeared beneath his hospital shirt. A surgical scar curved above his collarbone, where someone had once cut into him to keep him breathing. His right arm worked only when it wanted to. His voice had vanished after a blast, injury, and months of complications, leaving him with a slate board, eye blinks, and the occasional broken whisper no one could understand. On the wall above his bed hung the only colorful things in that room: a line of medals, challenge coins, 2 folded unit patches, and a dog tag blackened along one edge. Beside them was a photograph of a field clinic made of tars and sandbags. The image had been scorched at one corner, but 3 figures remained visible. A young soldier on a stretcher, a medic bent over him, and the blurred shadow of a military working dog standing in the smoke. Elias never let anyone touch that wall. Not doctors, not cleaning staff, not even Mara. And Elia trusted Mara. Ranger had belonged to the hospital school therapy program for 3 years, but everyone knew he was not like the other dogs. He did not wander from bed to bed looking for treats. He chose patients like he was only he could hear. 6 months ago, the first time Ranger had been brought to Ward C, He walked past 15 beds, ignored 3 calling soldiers, entered Sia, and put his head on Elias Reed's lap. Elias had cried without making a sound. Since then, Renger had refused to leave him for longer than an hour. Major Vale stopped in Elias's doorway. "Sergeant Reed," he said, loud enough for the whole ward to hear. "By authority of the Command Review Board, these decorations are being removed, pending investigation." Elias' eyes move slowly from Val to down the siren. "What investigation?" she asked. Val did not look at her. "This is not a nursing matter. It is if you distress my patient. Here is not your patient alone, Nurse Voss." Val smiled thinly. "And distress is not the same as accountability." The word moved through the ward like a slap. Man stopped pretending not to listen. A corporal with one leg leaned out from his room. An old Marin in bed, Sistias. Nurse Utunpar, Mara's closest friend on the shift, froze beside the supply closet, with towels pressed against her chest. Colonel Price stepped forward. "This will be handled with dignity." But dignity was already dead by the time the evidence clerk entered Elias's room. The clerk rose. Renger rose. It was not dramatic at first. No bark, no leap, just a sudden, muscular shift from old dog to war dog, his paws planted wide, his head lowered. A sound formed deep in his chest. "Control the animal," Vale ordered. "Mara, move out." "Easy." Renger's eyes did not leave the clerk's hand. The clerk hesitated. Vale stepped in and removed the metal himself. The ribbon came free from the wall with a soft ripping sound. Elias' fingers clenched around the blanket. Mara saw it. So did June. So did every patient watching. Vale dropped the metal into the gray box. Then another. Then a coin, then the folded patch from Lantern Ridge Medical Detachment, the patch Elias stared at every night before sleep. With every item removed, Elias seemed to sink deeper into his chair, not from shame, Myra realized, but from a pain too old to defend itself. "These items are not confirmed as belonging to Sergeant Reed," Vale announced. "Questions remain regarding after-action records, mice attributed honors, and possible fabrication connected to Operation Lantern Ridge." Mara felt her stomach tighten. Lantern Ridge? She had not heard that name spoken aloud inside a military hospital in years. For a moment, the ward blurred around her. She smelled smoke where there was disinfectant. She heard a rotor blaze where there was only air conditioning. Her tongue moved unconsciously toward the inside of her left wrist, where an old burn scar curved like a small pale feather. June saw Mara. Shenzhen saw Mara. Mara blinked herself back. "Major," she said carefully, "Sergeant Reed has severe neurological injury. Public confrontation can trigger. He understands, Elia. Don't away." Vale reached for the last item on the wall, the blackened dog tag. Renger barked once. It cracked through the ward like a rifle shot. The military police officers reached for their restraint. Mara stepped between them and the dog. "Don't," she said. Vale's eyes sharpened. "That animal is interfering with evidence collection. That animal is the only reason Sergeant Reed sleeps. That animal is a dog." Renger snarled, not at Vale's voice. "A dog tag." In Vale's hand, Elias's eye widened. His chest began to rise too fast. The monitor beside his bed ticked upward. 98. 120. 120. Mara moved to him. Alias, breathe with me. Look at me. He did not look at her. He looked at the dog tag. Val lifted it into the light, and for 1 second Mara saw the burned metal clearly. There was writing on it, but not enough from where she stood to read. Then Alias' lips parted. A thin sound scraped from his throat. Mara leaned close, thinking he was choking. His breath touched her ear. Sparrow, the word took the strength out of her knees. No one in Warsea knew that name. No one alive should have known that name. It had been Mara's call sign during the last week of Lantern Ridge, before the official report buried the clinic, the dead, and everything she had failed to save. Major Val heard it too. His polished face emptied. For the first time since he entered the ward, he looked less like a commander and more like a man who had seen a ghost stand up in a room full of witnesses. Ranger looked not at Vela's hand, but at the gray evidence box. His teeth caught the corner of the plastic. The box tipped. Metals spilled across the floor in a bright, terrible scatter. One coin rolled under Elias' bed. Ranger dove after it, scraping at the tile with frantic claws. Get him out, Vale shouted, but Ranger had already pulled something from beneath the bed. Not subjectory, not a medal, a folded strip of oilskin, tied with surgical thread. Mara picked it up with shaking fingers. Inside was a stained red trias tag, brittle with age. Across the top, in faded black marker, were 2 words, Sparrow Lives, and beneath them, written in a hand Mara recognized from her nightmares, Vale left us. For several seconds, no one moved. The war seemed to hold its breath around that little red tag in Mara's hand. Machines kept beeping, but even they sounded far away, like signals from another world. Elias sat frozen in his wheelchair, eyes locked on the tag. Ranger pressed his body against Elias' legs and watched Mara as if waiting for her to understand an order that had taken years to arrive. Major Vale recovered first. He crossed the room in 3 hard steps and held out his hand. That belongs with the evidence. Mara folded her fingers around the tag. No one, she said. The word surprised even her. It was not loud. It did not shake. It came out quiet and final. Val's gaze dropped to her fist. Nurse Voss. Colonel Price spoke before he could continue. Major, stand down. With respect, Colonel, I said. Stand down. The authority in Price's voice did not erase the tension, but it slowed it. Violet's face hardened. The military police officers watched the exchange with discomfort, suddenly aware that every wounded man in Ward C was looking at them. What is that? Mara could not answer immediately. Her past had not returned all at once. It came in fragments. The red dust of Lantern Ridge, a clinic roof sagging under, Martyr Fletcher begging for his mother, a boy on a stretcher begging for his mother, her own hands slippery with blood that was not hers, and a radio voice repeating, "Retreat order confirmed. All mobile personnel withdraw. All mobile personnel, not all wounded." Mara swallowed. "It's a trace tag. I can see that. I was used in the field. Red meant immediate evacuation." Vale's laugh was short and cold. "Any medic could tell you that." Mara opened the oilskin again. Her fingertips trembled as she saw the full tag. Most of the medical notes had been washed away by time and moisture, but several marks remained. A pulse rate, a blood pressure that should not have supported life, a crude drawing of an airway incision, and at the bottom, beneath the accusation against Vale, a set of initials. MV, her initials. June had moved closer. She saw them too. Mara, she whispered. Why are your initials on that? Mara's throat tightened. Because I was there. Because I cut a hole in a man's throat with a field scalpel while the roof burned above us. Because I thought he died anyway. Because the report said everyone in the East Treatment Tent was lost. Because I let myself believe it. Since believing anything else meant remembering I had crawled out while someone was still breathing. But she said none of that. Major Vale's voice sharpened. This is exactly why the items are being removed. Sergeant Red is medically compromised. He has collected battlefield debris, forged memories, and unverified officers, and calmed good officers, and confused hospital staff. Alias's head turned slowly. There was nothing weak in the way he looked at Vale. His body was damaged. His voice was broken. But his eyes carried the focused hatred of a witness who had survived long enough to see the man who left him behind walk in wearing medals. Ranger gave another low growl. Price noticed. Major, she said, why would a therapy dog react to your evidence box? Vale did not glance at Ranger. Because it is agitated. Dogs feed off human emotion. Ranger served 3 deployments before retirement, June said suddenly. Her voice shook, but she kept going. He doesn't react like that without a scent or command. Vale looked at her as if she were furniture that had spoken. And you are? Nurse Park? Then stay in your lane, Nurse Park. Mara felt June flinch beside her. Something old and hot moved through Mara's chest. Her lane, Mara's CIS, keeping patients alive. Same as mine. You might try respecting that while standing in a hospital ward. A murmur passed through the patients. Vale's jaw tightened. Colonel Price raised one hand. Major Vale, the items will be secured in my office until this review is clarified. Not in your custody. That is irregular. SO is publicly stripping a wounded soldier's room. Based on paperwork I have not been permitted to fully examine. For the first time, Mare saw a crack in Vale's control. It vanished quickly, but it had been there. Price ordered the evidence clerk to gather the medals. June helped, but Ranger refused to let anyone touch the blackened dog tag. He stood over it, teeth barely visible, until Elias lifted one shaking hand and touched the dog's collar. Ranger, Mara sighed softly. Let me. The dog looked at her. Mara had worked with frightened men, angry men, dying men, and dogs who remembered explosions more clearly than kindness. Ranger's stare was not an animal's confusion. It was recognition. He stepped back. Mara picked up the dog tag. This close, she could read the engraving. Read Elias J. below it. A second set of letters had been scratched in by hand, jagged and uneven. Spiral, her call sign. The ward tilted under her. Elias watched her, tears standing in his eyes. Why would he have your call sign on his tag? June asked. Mara closed her fingers around the metal. It was warm from Ranger's body. I don't know. She lied. Colonel Price looked at her too closely. Nurse Voss, you served before Fort Mercy. Yes, Mom. Where? Mara met Vale stare across the room. He knew the answer. He had always known. That was why he had never used her first name before today. That was why he had dismissed her so quickly. Not because she was dangerous. Because she was dangerous. Forward Surgical Team 3. Mara said. Attached to Lantern Ridge. The word chanced. It was subtle, but everyone felt it. The story was no longer about a confused patient and suspicious medals. It was about a nurse standing beside a wounded man, holding a tab from a buried mission that both of them should not remember the same way. Vale's voice dropped. Colonel, may I speak with you privately? No, Price said. Not yet. Elias' breath hitched again. His right hand clawed at the blanket. Ranger pressed closer, whining now, his nose nudging Elias' fingers toward the slate bar clipped to the wheelchair. Mara grabbed the slate. Elias, do you want to write? His hand shook too badly to hold the marker. Mara placed it between his fingers anyway and steadied his wrist, just as she has steadied hundreds of wounded hands through pain, fear, and last letters home. The marker scraped one line, then another. It took him nearly a minute to form 3 broken words. Not my medals. Mara stared. The patients behind her whispered, not my medals. Vale looked as if he wanted to snatch the slate and smash it. Price leaned closer. Whose medals are they, Sergeant? Elias squeezed his eyes shut. His body trembled with effort. Ranger suddenly left his side. He padded to the overturned evidence box, sniffed each item, then took one metal ribbon gently between his front teeth. He carried it to Mara and dropped it at her feet. It was not a combat action medal, not a campaign ribbon. It was a silver life-saving cross, unofficial in the way some battlefield honors were unofficial until enough people died proving they mattered. Mara remembered it because medics joked on the early days of deployment. A silver cross for those who entered fire without a weapon. On the back someone had scratched a name, not Elias Reed. M. Voss. Mara could not breathe. Major Vale stepped backward, and Elias, with the last strength left in his broken voice, whispered again, "Save us." Then his eyes rolled back, the monitor screamed, and word C exploded into motion. Mara caught Elias before he slid from the wheelchair. His body folded sideways, too heavy and too light at once, the way severely injured patients became when consciousness left them. Ranger barked and spun in frantic circles, then planted himself between Elias and Major Vale as if the officer himself had caused the collapse. "June, help me get him to the bed," Mara ordered. June moved instantly, sounded 2 corpsmen from the nurse's station. Whatever authority Major Vale had carried into the room dissolved beneath the sound of the monitor alarm. In a hospital, rank mattered until a patient's heart rhythm changed. 10 only hands mattered. Clear space. Mara sighed. Price, I need him flat. Colonel Price did not argue. She helped move the wheelchair back. Elias's breathing came harsh and thin. His face had gone gray beneath the scars. Mara checked his pulse, his pupils, the tension in his neck. Not a full seizure, not cardiac arrest. His airway was narrowing under stress, the old injury reacting to panic and exertion. "Get respiratory," Mara sighed. "Already paged," June replied. Mara leaned over Elias. "Elias, listen to me. You are in Fort Mercy. You are not in the field. You are not in the field. You are not alone." His eyes fluttered. Ranger whined. Major Vale stood near the doorway, one hand clenched around his own wrist. For all his polished command, he looked restless in the face of a man struggling for breath. "Remove the dog." "No." ITS contaminated the room and escalated. "Major," Colonel Price said, voice low, "one more word, and I will have you removed from my ward." That silenced him. Mara slid 2 fingers along Elias' throat and felt the rigid scar tissue beneath the skin. It brought Lantern Ridge back so hard that for one terrible second she was no longer in Ward C. She was kneeling in dust. A lamp swung above her. Someone screamed for morphine that had run out. A young soldier lay on a door used as a stretcher. blood bubbling at his lips. She remembered saying, "Stay with me." She remembered cutting. She remembered a dog barking outside the tent. She did not remember the soldier's face, or she had not let herself. His scar, June said quietly. "Mara, look. I am looking. Nora, look at the pattern." Mara, hands still. The scar above Elias's collarbone was crude, angled, slightly too low for a textbook airway cut. She knew that because for years she had carried shame over that exact angle. She had been 26, exhausted, concussed, working by headlamp while artillery walked closer to the clinic. Her supervising surgeon had been dead. Her supplies had been scattered by a blast. She had made the cut where she could, not where the manual wanted. The patient had lived long enough to breathe. Then the tent collapsed. She had never known if he made it out. Mara looked at Elias's face, not the burns, not the damage. Beneath it, the line of his brow, the small scar on his lower lip, the way his right hand curled when pain hit him, the boy on the door. Her stomach turned. "Oh God," she whispered. June heard. "Why?" Mara shook her head because if she spoke, she would fall apart. Respiratory arrived with equipment. Together, they stabilized him. Oxygen, medication, careful positioning. The monitor slowed grudgingly. From panic to warning to watchfulness. Elias remained unconscious, but his breathing deepened. Ranger laid his head against the bed frame. Only then did Mara realize she was still holding the silver life-saving cross. M. Voss, her name scratched into metal that should not exist. Colonel Price saw it. "Nurse Voss, after Sergeant Reed is stable, you and I are going to talk." Major Vale stepped forward. "Colonel, she should be relieved from duty immediately. Her connection to this alleged evidence compromises. My patient almost stopped breathing because you staged a public interrogation in his room." Mara said. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard. "Do not lecture me about compromise." Vala's eyes went cold. "Careful." Ranger lifted his head. Mara turned away before anger made her reckless. She adjusted Elias' blanket, checked his IV line, and wiped sweat from his brow with gauze. The work steadied her. It always had. Hands first, grief later. That was the medicist's bargain. But grief was not waiting politely anymore. June touched her shoulder. "Mara, Sparrow." Mara closed her eyes. "In Lantern Ridge," she said, barely above a whisper, "we used call signs because the radio traffic was compromised. Mine was Sparrow. Why? Because I was small enough to crawl under collapsed beams." She gave a humorless breath. "And stupid enough to do it." June's face softened. "That's not stupid." Mara looked at Elo. "How? Ego killed." Major Vale laughed under his breath. Mara's head snapped toward him. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Some people rewrite memory to survive guilt, and some rewrite reports." Mara said. The word went still again. Colonel Price stepped between them. "No accusations without process." "Then start one," Mara sighed. "Because that text says he left wounded men behind." Vale's voice hardened. "That is battlefield trash. It could have been written by anyone." Ranger suddenly rose and walked to Vale. Not aggressively, not barking. He sniffed the major's boots, then his pant leg, then froze at Vala's left sleeve. His nose pressed against a seam near the cuff. Ranger inhaled sharply and let out a strange, broken whine. Vale jerked at his arm back. "Get away!" Ranger barked twice. Mara recognized the rhythm. 2 short alerts, scent found. She had heard military working dogs give that signal before. Explosives. Bodies, bodies, bodies. "What is in your sleeve?" June asked. Vale's expression darkened. "'Tis is absurd." Colonel Price's eyes narrowed. Major Vale adjusted his cuff. "A dog sniffing cloth is not evidence." Ranger barged down and deposited the floor beneath Vale's arm. Price held out her hand. "Show me." "Colonel, I will not be searched in a patient room." "Because a retired animal." Elias made a sound from the bed. Not a word, a rasp. Everyone turned. His eyes were open. He was looking at Vale's sleeve. His left hand rose an inch from the blanket, shaking violently. Mara placed the slate board beneath it. He could barely move, but he dragged one finger across the surface where the marker had rolled. June handed it to him. His writing was worse than before. Broken lines, half letters, but Mara read it. "Pitch," Ranger barked once. Vale stepped back toward the door. Colonel Price moved faster than Mara expected. "Major Vale, remain where you are. I have a command briefing. You have a patient accusing you. Through physical evidence, a service doc alerting on your uniform, and a nurse with direct mission history. You are not leaving this ward until I say so." For a moment, it looked like he might defy her. Then one of the military police officers shifted into the doorway. Vale slowly reached into the inner seam of his dress, pulled out a small folded cloth. A patch, old, burned, hidden, lantern, rich medical detachment. But unlike Elias's patch, this one had writing on the back in faded marker. Mara saw only 2 words before Vale closed his fist. "She stayed." Ranger lunged, caught the cloth in his teeth, and tore it free. As it fell open on the hospital floor, a photograph slipped out from inside the fold. Mara picked it up. In the photo, a young combat medic knelt in smoke with blood up to her elbows, holding pressure on a soldier's throat, while a war dog stood beside her. The medic was Mara, the soldier was Elias, and standing in the background, walking away toward the evacuation trucks, was Major Owen Vale. Colonel Price ordered Ward C locked down. Not like a prison, like a wound being held shut before it tore open. The military police moved Major Vale to the commander's conference room. He did not resist, but his face had gone pale under his anger. The evidence clerk gathered the medals again, this time under Price, direct supervision, and placed them into a sealed medical property bag instead of Vale's gray box. June took Ranger into the corridor to calm him, though Ranger kept trying to pull back toward Elias' room. Mara stayed at the bedside. Elias had slipped into exhausted sleep after writing one more word on the slate. "File." That was all. "File." It sat there in black marker like a door with no handle. Mara stared at it while machines breathed their steady electronic language around her. "File." There had been a file once. Everyone on Lantern Ridge had known that. After a mission went wrong, paperwork multiplied, life flies, casualty reports, evacuation logs, ammunition expenditure, command statements, medical triage sheets. But Operation Lantern Ridge had been different. The reports disappeared behind classification. Names were corrected, then corrected again. Mara's statement was taken while she had a concussion, an infection in her arm, and 3 hours of sleep across 4 days. She remembered telling an investigator that the East treatment tent had still had living wounded inside when the withdrawal order came. He asked, "Did you visually confirm survivors?" She said yes. He asked, "Did Major Vale hear that information?" She said yes. He asked, "Were you in an altered state due to blast exposure?" She said she did not know. 2 weeks later, she was told her memories were unreliable. A month later, she was offered medical discharge instead of disciplinary review. She signed because she was tired, ashamed, and terrified. that if she fought, the families of the dead would have to hear that their sons had been abandoned twice, once in battle and once in paperwork. So she came to Fort Mercy under her mother's surname, Voss. No rank displayed, no old photographs, no stories. She became the nurse who stayed late, the nurse who remembered how patients liked their pillows, the nurse who never attended promotion ceremonies, never stood near metal walls, and never answered when someone asked where she had learned to move so calmly during mass casualty drills. Now Elias Reed lay in front of her, alive, and all the silence she had built was falling apart. June returned with Ranger. The dog entered quietly, walked straight to Elias's bed, and rested his muzzle near Elias' left hand. Then he looked at Mara, then at the door, then back at Mara. "He wants something," June said. Mara nodded. "He's been trying to tell us all morning. Do you know what file Elias means?" "No, do you think veils us?" Mara looked through the glass wall toward the corridor, where Colonel Price was speaking sharply into a phone. "I think he's afraid of it." June sat on the edge of a nearby chair. "Then we find it," Mara almost smiled. You saved my first." Nye froze. June folded her arms. "You told me nurses. Duh, not abandoned nurses. That was different." "No, it was smaller." Mara looked away, but the words landed. Colonel Price entered. Her posture was still command straight, but something in her expression had changed. The disbelief was gone. In its place was the grim focus of an officer, realizing a route she supervised had become part of a crime scene. Major O'Vale claims the patch and photograph were planted. Price seat on his uniform. June asked. "He says he was bringing them as supporting evidence of Sergeant Reed's delusions." Mara gave a hollow laugh. "I rested Lantern Rich Rakers from Central Command." The response was immediate. "Now, classified, sealed, restricted to command-level review. Then request mandate." "My access was blocked." June frowned. "You're the hospital commander, and someone above me does not want that file open." Ranger lifted his head at the word file. Price noticed. "Why is he doing that?" Mara knelt beside Ranger. "File," she said softly. Ranger stood. June's eye widened. "Say it again." Price said. "File." Ranger went to the doorway, looked back, and whined. Mara's pulse quickened. He knows the word, or he recognizes how we say it. June siege. If Elias taught him to find something called file. Price stared at the dog. Where would he have hidden? Ranger pulled hard. Mara grabbed a leash before he dragged her into the hall. Colonel Price hesitated only 1 second. Go. June. "Stay with Sergeant Reed." "No." Elias rasped. The word was barely sound, but it stopped them all. His eyes were open again, wet with effort. His fingers moved toward Ranger. Mara leaned close. "You want Ranger to go, babe. You want me to follow him?" Another blink. "Yes." Elias's gaze shifted toward Price, then to the metals bag, then back to Mara. His lips formed something. She bent closer. "Room, not mine." Mara frowned. "The room is not yours." His brow tightened in frustration. His fingers twitched. June placed the marker in his hand again. He scratched slowly, painfully. "Old room?" Price looked at Mara. "Sergeant Reed was transferred here from long-term neurological recovery 3 months ago. Before that, he was in the West Annex. The annex closed for renovation." June said. Ranger pulled again. Mara understood. "His old room." Price grabbed it. "Metals bag. We go now." The West Annex smelled different, from Worsea, less antiseptic, more dust and old plaster. Renovation plastic hung in sheets from the ceiling. Half the rooms were empty, beds stripped, equipment removed. Their footsteps echoed. Ranger pulled them past the nurse's station, past 3 open rooms, to the very end of the corridor. Room WA. The door was locked. Price used her master key. Inside, the room looked abandoned. No bed, no curtains, just pale rectangles on the wall, where frames had once hung, and a faint rust-colored stain near the floor that Mara hoped was not bloody. Ranger crossed the room and scratched at the wall beneath the window. Mara knelt. There was a loose baseboard. Price handed her a pen light. Mara slid her fingers under the edge and pulled. The strip came away with a dry crack, revealing a narrow cavity behind the wall. Inside was a sealed waterproof medical pouch. Mara lifted it out. Her name was written across the front. Not Mara Voss, not Nurse Voss. Ranger sat back and gave one sharp bark. Price opened the pouch carefully. Inside were photocopied triage tags, a cracked memory card, a folded letter, and a small cassette recorder wrapped in gauze. On the letter, written in A.S. Reed's uneven hand, were the words, "If they remove the metals, give this to the medic who stayed." Mara's vision blurred. June's voice came through Price's radio, frantic and breathless. "Colonel, get back now. Major Vale is in Worsea. He says he has transfer orders for Alice." Ranger was already running before the West Annex became a tunnel of noise. Mara ran behind Ranger, her shoes striking dust, plastic sheets snapping against her shoulders as the dog pulled ahead like a dark arrow. Colonel Price kept pace with the sealed pouch clutched under one arm, her radio pressed to her mouth. "Security to Worsea," Price ordered. "Do not allow Sergeant Reed to be moved. Repeat, do not allow transfer." Static answered. Then June's voice cut in and again. Hair unplugging him. Mara's blood went cold. By the time they reached Worsea, the corridor was full of bodies. Patients had wheeled themselves out of rooms. A corpsman stood between 2 military police officers and Elias's doorway, palms raised, uncertain whose orders outranked whose. June stood inside the room with one hand on Elias' betrayer and the other gripping the IV pole light. Major Vale was there. So was a civilian transport team with a stretcher. Elias sat half upright in bed, pale and sweating, oxygen tubing pulled crooked beneath his nose. Ranger burst through the crowd and leapt onto the foot of the bed, placing himself across Elias' legs. Mara entered right behind him. "Step away from my patient." Vale turned. "He is being moved to secure neurology by..." He held up a document. "Command medical review." Price snapped it from his hand, scanned it, and her expression sharpened. "His order is unsigned. I was verbally authorized." "By whom?" Vale did not answer quickly enough. Mara moved to Elias, checking his oxygen pulse. IV line. His heart rate was too high again. His skin was clammy. Someone had disconnected his monitor leads. June spoke through clenched teeth. "I told him he wasn't stable. And you were correct," Mara said. Vale's voice rose. "His patient is central to a classified investigation. His fixation on false memories is being exploited by staff with personal involvement." Price held up the waterproof pouch. "Then you will be pleased to know we found his file." The effect was immediate. Vale's face changed before he could stop it. Fear. There it was again, naked and unmistakable. Only for a second, but the war saw. Ranger saw too. He growled so low it seemed to come from the floor. Vel pointed at the pouch. That material is classified and illegally retained. Then you admit it's authentic, Mara said. He looked at her with hatred. I admit nothing. Elias made a strangled sound. Mara turned back to him. Don't try to speak. But he was already fighting his own body. His mouth opened. His right hand gripped Ranger's fur. His eyes were fixed not on Vel, not on Price, but on Mara. Spar, the sound tore. His airway tightened again. The monitor, reattached by June, screamed. Everyone out who isn't medical, Mara ordered. Vel stayed. Henny's transfer. Henny's air. Mara lowered the bed, lifted Elias's chin, adjusted all airway sight. The swelling was worse. Stress had triggered the scar tissue. His breath whistled thinly, dangerously. Respiratory cart. Mara. See. June moved. Mara's hands were calm, but inside she was back in Lantern Ridge. There was the boy on the door. There was smoke pressing down. There was Vel's voice on the radio saying, "No viable casualties. Remain in East Tent." There was Mara screaming. There's Mara. Hand, then the blast. Elias' hand clamped around her wrist. His eyes begged for the words he had not finished. Not now, Mara whispered. You don't have to prove anything now. But his grip tightened. Ranger climbed higher and placed his head near Elias' chest, grounding him. The dog's breathing was steady. Elias tried to match it. Now, ow. Mara recognized what Ranger was doing. He had been trained to regulate panic in injured handlers. But this was more than training, better than the machines did. The dog knew Elias breathing better than the machines did. The word fell silent except for that harsh rhythm. Elias' throat worked. Mara, he rasped. She froze. No one had told him her first name in that room. Mara. Voss. June covered her mouth. Elias' face twisted with pain as he forced the rest out. Medic. Saved us. Mara shook her head, tears burning. Stop, please. But Elias had waited too many years for silence to ask his permission. Valet left. The words were broken, shredded, barely human, but they were enough. Every patient in Ward C heard them. The corpsman heard them. The military police heard them. Colonel Price heard them. Major Vale stepped forward. This is medically induced confusion. Ranger snapped at the air between them. Mara did not look away from Elias. Breathe. That's an order. A ghost of something like humor crossed his damaged face. Then his airway failed. The sound stopped. His chest pulled hard and shallow. Mara's world narrowed to one task. Keep him alive. June, emergency airway kit. June's eyes widened. Mara, now. The kit hit her hand seconds later. Respiratory arrived at the door. But Mara was already gloved. She knew Elias's scar. She knew the ruined tissue. She knew the mistake she had made the first time. The angle cut by fear and fire. This time there was light. This time there were supplies. This time she was not alone. Still, her hand paused. For one fragment of a second, guilt whispered that she had no right to cut him again. Ranger barked once, sharp, commanding. Mara breathed. Her hands became the hands of the quiet medic everyone had mistaken for only a nurse. Precise, fast, gentle where they could be, ruthless where they had to be. She opened the airway through scar tissue, guided the tube, secured the line, and watched Elias's chest rise. Air entered him. The monitor steadied. June exhaled like she had been underwater. Price whispered, "My God." Mara held the tube in place until respiratory took over. Her gloves were smeared red. Elias lay unconscious again, but alive. Ranger rested his forehead against Mara's arm. For the first time, She touched the dog not as therapy staff, not as handler, but as a fellow witness. Vala's voice came from the doorway, stripped of polish. Face changes, nothing. Mara turned. Blood on her gloves, tears on her face, the sealed file at her feet. Ranger standing beside her, Elias breathing because she had refused to freeze. It changes everything, she said. Colonel Price opened the waterproof pouch and removed the cassette recorder. Vale lunged. The military police grabbed him before he reached it. Price pressed play. At first, only static-filled word, Sidida. A young man's voice, weak and terrified, came through the tiny speaker. This is Reed. East 10 still has survivors. Medic Sparrow is alive. She stayed with us. Major Val ordered retreat while we were breathing. The tape clicked. A second voice followed. Mara's own, younger and hoarse with smoke. Tell command. We have 12 alive. Tell them not to bury us. Then came the sound of a dog barking in the fire. The tape did not shout. That made it worse. Its small, damaged voice filled the ward. Without force, without music, without mercy. Static crackled between each breath. And beneath it came sounds no hospital should ever have had to hear. Distant explosions, metal groaning, someone praying. A dog barking until its voice broke. Mara stood motionless. She had spent years believing memory was a cruel artist, repenting guilt until it looked larger than truth. But the tape was not memory. It was proof. It carried the smoke in its pauses and the terror in every ragged breath. Price did not stop the recording. No one asked her to. Elias lay sedated now, chest rising through the new airway. June stood near his IV pump, crying silently while pretending to chart. Ranger had climbed onto a chair beside the bed, his head level with Elias's hand. Major Vale sat in a chair by the nurse's station with one military police officer on either side. He no longer looked like a man in command. He looked like a man counting exits. On the tape, young Elias coughed. Medic Sparrow cut my airway. I can breathe. She's moving Sergeant Bell next. She said if command won't come, we crawl. Then Mara's younger voice, close to the recorder. Reed, keep talking. If you pass out, it'll slap you awake. A weak laugh. Then another explosion. The entire word flinched. Mara gripped the bed rail. In her mind she saw it again, but now with pieces restored. Elias had been awake. Elias had known. Elias had recorded. Where did he get the recorder? June whispered. Price looked inside the pouch. ICE Army issue. Field journalist model. Ma remembered a soldier in the corner of the tent with a camera around his neck. A public affairs kit. He had died before evacuation. She had used his bag for bandages. On the tape, a new sound. Mara looked at Ranger. Was that you? June asked softly. Mara shook her head. Ranger's not old enough. Price pulled a folded page from the file. Military working dog attached to Lantern Ridge. Name, Atlas. Handler, killed in first strike. Ranger lifted his head at the name Atlas. His torn ear twitched. June frowned. Why would Ranger react? Mara looked the file. There was a photograph clipped to the page. A younger dog stood beside a larger Malinois, both in desert harnesses. The larger one had a black mask and strong shoulders. The smaller had one ear slightly bent even then. Price read aloud. Atlas sired one surviving pup before deployment retirement. Pup transferred to military therapy training. After combat, exposure at Lantern Ridge Perimeter. Mara stared at Ranger. You were there, she whispered. Not inside the tent, not as the dog barking on the tape, but there, a young dog in training, caught in the convoy, surviving the same mission that shattered all of them. Ranger slipped off the chair and pressed against her leg. Because he sensed sadness. He had found a man from the same fire. And when Vale touched the dog tag, Ranger had remembered the scent of fear, smoke, and abandonment. The tape continued. Mara's younger voice came in fragments. Bell is gone. Reed alive. Santos alive. Kim alive. I need hands. Then a male voice, crisp and unmistakable. Major Vale, East End is non-recoverable. Withdraw all mobile personnel. Mara's voice answered, furious. We have living, weaving, wounded. You have casualties. They are talking. Then silence your radio and withdraw. The words seemed to darken around those words. Then came the line that made Evan Colonel Price close her eyes. If you stay, Sparrow, you stay off the record. Static. A burst of gunfire. Elias whispering. She stayed. The recorder clicked off. No one moved. Finally, Price turned to Vale. You told command the East End was lost before extraction. Vale's voice was rough. That recording is incomplete. You told them there were no viable casualties. Identical decision. You falsified medical status. I preserved the convoy. Mara walked toward him slowly. You preserved yourself. Vale stood, but the officers forced him back down. His mask cracked. You think staying made you noble? You nearly got everyone killed dragging bodies through drainage culverts, while enemy fire closed in. Bodies. Mara. Seat. They were alive. 3 died anyway. Mara flinched. Vale saw it and leaned into the wound. There. That's the truth you ran from. You disobeyed orders, lost patience, and then built yourself into a martyr. Ranger growled. Mara's voice dropped. How many lived? Vale said nothing. Price checked the file. Her face changed. Mara, she said quietly. According to Reed's notes, 9 of the 12 extracted from East End survived to surgery. 9. The number hit Mara like a hand through her ribs. For years, she had carried 12 ghosts. She had believed the report. She had believed Vale when he said her delayed withdrawal cost lives without saving any. She had believed the silence that followed her discharge. 9 survived. Mara turned away because her knees weakened. June caught her by the elbow. 9. June whispered. Mara. 9. Mara covered her mouth. Elias had tried to tell her. The medals were not his. They were theirs. Proof gathered, piece by a man who could barely speak, waiting for the medic who thought she had failed him to come close enough to hear. Price removed another document from the pouch. This is a sworn statement, she said, signed by Reed before his neurological decline. It names Major Vale, requests reopening of the Lantern Ridge Review, and recommends Recognize Medic Mara Voss, call sign Sparrow. Vale shook his head. A brain-injured soldier's fantasy. This was notarized 3 years before his injury worsened. Price. His mouth closed. June looked at the medals bag. Kai's face hardened. Because Sergeant Reed was scheduled to testify by video tomorrow, before the decorations audit board, someone flagged his medal display as fraudulent to discredit him first. Mara looked at Vale. Tomorrow. That meant this was not only about the past. It was an active cover-up. Elias had been hours away from speaking publicly, and Vale had entered the ward to strip him of credibility before he could. Ranger suddenly began pawing at the waterproof pouch again. Mara knelt. What is it? He nosed aside the papers and hooked one claw under a smaller inner pocket. June opened it. Inside was a flash drive taped to a second dog tag. This tag was not Elias. Mara read the name. Atlas. The word dog from the tape on the back. Scratched into the metal were coordinates. Price's radio crackled before anyone could speak. A security officer's voice came through. "Cornell, we have a problem at the records archive. Fire alarm triggered. East storage is filling with smoke." Vala's eyes flicked up. Mara understood. The file in her hand was not the only copy, and someone was burning the rest. Colonel Price did not hesitate. "La Major Vel in holding," she ordered. 2 officers. "No calls, no zitters." Vala surged to his feet. "You do not have the authority." Price stepped close enough that the ward could hear every word. "I have a patient nearly killed by an unauthorized transfer. Evidence of falsified battlefield reports. And now a records archive triggered minutes after. We found a drive tied to the same mission. I have enough authority to keep you breathing in a chair until federal investigators arrive." For a moment, Vala's rage stripped him bare. Then he smiled. "Terrible. You still don't know what's on that drive," he said. Mara felt the cold under those words. Ranger barked at him. The officers took Val away, but his smile remained in the room like smoke. The archive was 2 floors below the main hospital, in a concrete wing built before anyone thought digital records would outlive paper. Sprinklers had contained the fire, but smoke curled through the corridor when Mara, Price, June, and Ranger arrived. Elias remained in Warsi under respiratory supervision, sedated but stable. Leaving him felt wrong, but June had said what Mara could not. "He gathered this for you. Don't let it burn." Now June stood beside her, coughing into her sleeve as alarms flashed red. A security officer blocked the door. "Colonel, fire team says no entry." Price held up her badge. "Is the fire active?" "Contained, but air quality." Ranger suddenly pulled toward the door with such force that Mara nearly lost the leash. "Ranger," she said. The dog did not stop. His nose was low, tracking beneath the smoke. Price looked at the officer. "Get us respirators." 2 minutes later, masked and moving fast, they entered East Storage. Rows of files stood under dripping sprinklers. Some boxes had collapsed into wet pulp. Others were charred along the edges. The smell made Mara's throat close, not because of smoke, but because it was too close to memory. Burned paper, wet cloth, old blood, awakened by water. Ranger led them past 3 rows, turned left, then stopped at a cabinet marked L restricted operations. Its lock had been cut. Inside, several folders were missing, but Ranger ignored the empty space. He scratched at the bottom drawer. June pulled it open. There was nothing inside but water. Ranger barked and pawed harder. Marmount ran her hand along the drawer's back panel and found a seam, false backing. Price handed her a tool from the emergency kit. Mara pried the panel loose. A vacuum-sealed envelope slid out. Inside was a military data cartridge and a paper marked "Lantern Ridge Original Casualty Log." Unanted copy. Price eyes sharpened. His is what he wanted to strive. June looked at the flash drive around Mara's neck. "10 what's on now, safe?" The answer came 20 minutes later in the hospital command room. Price connected both devices to an offline terminal while legal officers, hospital security, and 2 federal military investigators joined by secure video. Major Val was not present. That decision made Mara uneasy, but Price assured her he was guarded. Ranger lay under the conference table with his body pressed against Mara's boots. The first file opened. "Casualty." Mara watched at the screen as if watching graves open. "Read, alive. Airway established by Medic Voss Santos. L alive. Extract via drainage route. Dim dia, alive, deceased. Murray tira diasis, hadit, s, alive, critical. The original log listed 12 living casualties in East End. At the exact time Vale reported no viable survivors. June squeezed Mara's hand under the table. The second file was video. The room fell silent. Rainy footage filled the monitor. Night vision smoked. The camera tilted sideways, probably attached to a damaged helmet. A field clinic appeared in green-gray shapes. Wounded soldiers lay under tarps. A young Mara moved between them, smaller than Mara remembered herself, face streaked black, eyes ferocious with exhaustion. Then Major Vale entered the frame. He wore captain's bars then, not Major's oak leaf. He was younger but unmistakable. Mara heard her own voice through the tiny speakers. "We need stretchers. I have 12 alive." Velo looked at the wounded, then at the burning ridge beyond the tent. "Convoy leaves in 4 minutes. They can't move." Then they don't move. The conference room seemed to stop breathing. On screen, young Mara stepped into his path. "Sir, I am reporting living casualties." Vale leaned close. "And I am reporting none." Why? His voice lowered, but the camera caught it. "Because Command Will asked why I lost the ridge." "Did Mandon testify about bad positioning?" June whispered. "Oh my God." The video shook as someone coughed. Elias Mara realized he had recorded this from the floor. Then came the part Mara had not remembered. Vale grabbed her arm. "You leave now or I write you as unstable, insubordinate, and responsible for everybody in this town." Young Mara looked terrified. Then she looked back at the wounded. The dog at last barked from somewhere beyond the entrance. Young Mara pulled her arm free. "Write what you want." The video cut forward. Mara crawling through a drainage culvert with Filas strapped to a field board behind her. Alice dragging a medical pack. Rain of sparks from the collapsing clinic. Another soldier pushing from behind. Mara turning back again and again, not abandoning, returning, over and over. The investigators on the screen stopped taking notes and simply watched. Ma did not cry. Not then. She was beyond tears. She felt each image rewrite. A scar inside her, not healed, not erased, but named correctly. The final video file opened. It showed Don, alive, wounded soldiers hidden in a dry riverbed. Mara sat beside him, hands shaking so violently she could not hold a canteen. Atlas lay across her legs, wounded in the side, still alert. Elias's young voice whispered from behind the camera. "What is your name, Doc?" Mara on screen answered without looking up. "Sparrow." "No. Real name." A long pause. "Mara Voss." "Hey, I remember." On screen, she gave a broken smile. "Don Ruiz, energy, remembering me. Breathe." The command room remained silent. Then Ranger crawled from under the table and placed a house dog tag in Mara's lap. Price took off her glasses. "Nurse Voss," she said, and her voice was unsteady. "On behalf of a uniform that failed you, I'm sorry." Mara looked at the frozen last frame on the screen. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I need Elias protected." The door opened behind them. A security officer stumbled in, face pale. Colonel Major Vale escaped custody. Ranger was on his feet before the sentence ended. From the hallway upstairs came the distant sound of Ward C's alarm. Mara ran toward Ward C with Ranger ahead of her, and the past burning at her back. The alarm was not a fire alarm this time. It was a patient alarm. The long, rising tone of a monitor pushed beyond safe limit. Her mind tried to split into. One part counted doors, corners, seconds. The other saw Vala's smile, heard his warning, and understood where he would go if all paper roads had closed. Elias, the last living witness in reach. Ranger reached the ward first. Mara heard him bark before she turned the corner. Ward C had become a battlefield without bullets. Patients shouted from doorways. A tray lay overturned near the nurse's station. A corpsman pressed a towel to his bleeding eyebrow. June stood outside C-hour, one arm braced against the doorframe, blocking entry with her own body. Inside the room, Major Vale held Elias' slate border in one hand and the oxygen line in the other. He had not fully disconnected it. Not yet. Maybe he wanted it to look like confusion. A patient pulling at tubes. A tragic complication. Maybe he wanted Elias awake enough to understand. Elias' eyes were open, wild with oxygen hunger. His bound hands trembled against the blanket. Ranger stood between Vale and the bed, teeth bared, but Vale had a chair raised in his free hand. Call him off. Vale sighed. Mara entered slowly. Her heart was hammering, but her voice came out soft. Ranger, hold. The dog froze, muscles shaking. Vale looked worse than before. His uniform was red at the cuffs from the archive sprinklers. His hair had fallen out of place. The polished officer was gone. What remained was the man from the video, cornered by truth. Move the dog, he said. No, I will crush his skull. Ranger did not blink. June whispered, Mara. Mara lifted one hand, asking for silence. Her eyes stayed on Vale. You killed enough dogs at Lantern Ridge. Something crossed his face. So fast others might have missed it, but Ranger did not. The dog snarled. Mara understood another missing piece. At last didn't the fire, she said. Vale's grip tightened on the chair. Price appeared at the doorway behind Mara, but Mara did not turn. She sensed security gathering, waiting for an opening. You shot him, Mara said quietly. After the riverbed. When he kept leading rescuers back, Vale laughed once, but it broke halfway. That animal was compromised. He was finding survivors. He was exposing a failed position. He was saving men. He was a dog. Ranger lunged forward 1 inch. Vale Frost made a rough sound through the airway. Elias made a rough sound through the airway. Mara looked at him. His eyes were not on Vale. They were on the metals bag sitting on the counter where June had placed it for safekeeping after the emergency. The bag was sealed, clear plastic shining under fluorescent light. Inside, the metals lay tangled together. Not trophies. Testimony. Mara suddenly knew what Elias wanted. She moved toward the counter. Vale snapped. Stop. Mara stopped. Then she spoke to Elias, not Vale. These were never yours because you were wearing them for the people who couldn't stand here. Elias blinked once. Yes, every medal was a survivor. Another blink. Yes, Mara swallowed. And mine. Elias' eyes moved toward the bottom of the bag. Ranger's ears twitchier. Mara stepped again. Vale swung toward Ranger. Everything happened at once. Ranger ducked under the chair instead of away from it. He drove his shoulder into Vale's legs, not biting, not mauling, but striking, with the precise force of a trained, working dog who knew the difference between stopping a threat and becoming one. Vale fell sideways. The oxygen line flew from his hand. June dove to reconnect it. Price and security rushed in. Vale fought like a drowning man. Mara reached Elias. Highway secure, June said. He okay? He's okay. Vale was forced to the floor, cuffed this time, with 3 officers holding him. He shouted about classification, command immunity, operational necessity. No one listened. Worsey watched it with the cold attention of men who knew cowardice when it wore medals. Ranger stood over him until Price gave the order to remove him. As Vale was Drea's bed, Elias lifted one shaking hand, not in fear, to point. His finger found Vale's chest, the rows of ribbons there. Mara understood before anyone else did. "He's wearing one," she said. Price stepped close. "Wearing what?" Mara looked into the medal's bag, then back at Vale's uniform. The silver life-saving cross, the one from Elias's wall, had her name scratched on the back, but Vale wore its official version on his chest, bright and polished, cited in his record for direct. Elias had collected the scratched field cross because the official one had been stolen, not just hidden. Stolen. Price removed the medal from Vale's uniform herself. He spat. "You have no right." She turned it over. The back had been filed smooth, but not perfectly. Under the damaged metal, faint scratches remained. "Ma'am, Voss." Worcy erupted, not in cheers, but in something deeper, a sound of outrage, grief, recognition. Men who had lost legs, voices, sleep, and years looked at the tiny medal as if it weighed more than the building. Mara felt the room sway. For a moment, she was 26 again, sitting in a dry riverbed with smoke in her hair, while Elias promised to remember her name. He had, through burns, through brain injury, through stolen records, through months without speech, he had remembered. Elias's fingers moved. Mara took the slayboard and placed the marker in his hand. This time he wrote slowly but clearly, "Put them back." Mara looked at him through tears. "The medals." He shook his head with the faintest motion. Then he added, "All names." June began crying openly. Colonel Price stood straighter. "We can saw that." And they did. Not that hour. Not perfectly. Not without investigations, sworn statements, command hearings, and angry people trying to pry. The old Marine from Cedus demanded tape and a marker. Corporal Ames wheeled himself to the nurse's station to print. Friesel cars. Jewel found blank cars. Price authorized the wall. Mara tried to stay out of it. Elias would not allow that. Ranger carried the silver life-saving cross to her in his mouth and dropped it at her feet again, just as he had before. This time, no one tried to take it away. Mara picked it up. The scratched name caught the light. Voss, Sparrow. Her chest hurt with a grief too large for one life. Not because a medal mattered. It did not compared to the men who never came home. But truth mattered. The difference between abandoned and saved mattered. She walked to Elias's wall. One by one, they put the medals back, not as decorations, as witness markers. Beneath each medal, June taped a card. Elias Reed survived. Daniel Kim survived. Tama Murray survived. Samir Hadid survived. Atlas, military working dog, led rescue route. Mara Voss, combat medic, callsign Sparrow, stayed. When Mara saw her own name, she stepped back. "I didn't deserve to be on that wall." Elias' hand found hers. His grip was weak, but it held. Ranger placed his head against both their hands, binding them with warmth, fur, and memory. Elias whispered one final word before sleep took him again. Not Sparrow, not saved. Home. And for the first time in years, Mara believed a hospital room could become one. They had removed Elias Reed's medals to shame him, but all they really did was uncover the names hidden beneath them. Mara never called herself a hero. Quiet medics rarely saw. But every night after that, Ranger slept beneath the restored wall, guarding the truth. If this story touched you, comment your country, and stay with the Quiet Medic for more stories of courage, loyalty, and justice.